as I do this. Sorry about that. Okay. Site selection, you do want to look at light, and we describe or define full sun as at least 6 full hours or more of sunlight per day. And that's, probably going to be a little harsh environment. If it gets more than 6 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours a day of sunlight is going to be a pretty warm spot. Partial sun, partial shade, those terms are kind of used interchangeably. This means about 3 to 6 hours of full sun each day. A lot of plants will prefer the full sun in the morning, and then shade in the early and late afternoon. Your hydrangeas definitely like that full morning sun, and then they like to like to be shaded in the afternoon to do well. Dappled sun is just kind of like walking through the woods. You just have enough sunlight to reach the ground that those little seedlings are getting sun and they're coming to light. So very, very little light, probably less than 2 hours of direct sunlight. And then you have full shade, which is going to be less than about 3 hours of direct sunlight each day with filtered sunlight the rest of the day. So it's very hard to grow something in that environment unless you are choosing native woodland shade plants. And there are a lot of good books and resources. So if you have a really fully shaded or dappled shade area, very heavily wooded area, you can still get plants that will flower at different times of the year, or you might choose them by characteristics of their foliage, have foliage variegation, and that will add some interest in these full shade areas, kind of, have something to bring them out. So no sun, you're not going to grow very much, so probably, except for maybe mushrooms if you want to grow mushrooms. So your light exposure is going to dictate the plants that can be used. Most of your annuals and perennials like the full sun to reach their full potential and flower and do well for you. A variety of them also do well in part sun. So if you're out at the garden center or you're at a plant sale, try to look at the tags or ask people, is this, a full sun plant, or is this full shade? What's its growth requirements going to be? I know when we have our Master Gardener plant sale, we try to make a note on there, where they should go. And that's very helpful. But if you were to go to one of our plant sales and you're not sure, you could always ask one of the Master Gardeners and they could tell you the growing conditions that's needed for that plant. So sun-loving plants need at least 6 hours of sun each day. If they don't receive 6 or more hours, they're going to be leggy, they're going to be lighter colored. They may not flower as well. They may get more diseases and insects because they're just not healthy. They need that sun to survive. So it's kind of like, when you put a shade loving plant out in the sun, you put a hosta out there and it just melts, unless it's a sun loving hosta. I know there's other varieties, but your typical hosta likes to be, out of the full sun, likes a shaded area. So you just have to look at what the plant's like or need. And I know we've gone over this before, but I always want to try to get this message home, is soil is the most important element to successful landscape design. And if you've got a new house, or you've got a house, may not be brand new, maybe one you just moved into that's got poor soil, take a couple of years and amend that soil before you put your foundation plants in. We usually say add about 3 to 4 inches of compost over an entire area and till that under. And then you can plant annuals, you can plant your cover crops that we talked about in a couple of our classes. Grow things like that a couple of years and just till it into the soil so that you're building it up. You're making your soil. Because our developers, just the nature of building a house, they're going to scrape off all that topsoil. And even if they put it in a pile and move it back, they've still created a compacted layer. And essentially you have to add that compost and those microorganisms, the worms, the good fungi and bacteria, put that back into the soil to bring it back alive. and then think about what types of trees or shrubs you might want to plant there. I know this takes patience because everybody wants an instant effect. So, but if you really want to do it right, take the time to do it right, take a couple years and amend those beds before putting your permanent plants in there. You want to do that. Okay. Before planting, you want to remove or kill any unnecessary vegetation, especially if you've got, perennial weeds that are hard to control. You're going to get those under control either by hand removal, manual, excuse me, or you can use chemicals, something like glyphosate or a similar type product that's going to kill everything. But it's best to try to get those perennial, hard to control weeds out before you build up the beds. And at this point is where you would conduct a soil test. And of course, we've gone over that, how to do the soil test. And then you want to till down about 6 to 8 inch depth, and you're mixing in that compost, you're mixing in all that good stuff, that humus, remove any rocks or debris. 2 to 3 inches of organic matter is going to be good. And then our best amendments here are, bark and humus, organic matter. Yeah, just grass clippings and manure. I think we talked about that once, to be careful about chemicals that may have been used on lawns or fields, especially where you have cattle, livestock, and you're getting hay. You might get old hay from somebody put that out as mulch or something, and it might have a chemical residual in it that's going to kill your plants. So you have to be very, very careful nowadays, because it just seems like a lot more chemicals are being used rather than other management techniques. Okay, where's it going here? Okay, this is this is an example of what you can do, which was very hard work. This is it's a sod roller, sod machine. And what we've done, this was the church, one of the churches that I go to, Bethlehem United Methodist, and I don't know history on this. It burnt back in 2009, I think it was, and then we rebuilt. Okay, when we rebuilt, there were several of us that worked together on the landscape, and where I asked them not to plant grass seed, because we were going to put shrubs there, they put the grass seed right up to the building. And so it was growing so well that I didn't want to kill it off. And so we got one of these machines, the sod stripper, and actually pulled up the sod, and we moved it over to another area where we could use it. And then we planted, put the organic matter in and planted the shrubs along that line. So yes, I created a lot of hard work trying to save a little bit of grass there, but it worked, and it still looks pretty good. But the sod machine, you better have some muscles, you better have some energy ready to use that thing. And then the little rolls of sod are very heavy. It's very heavy to move. So we were taking these, and we'd pick them up and put them in the bucket of a tractor, move them over to another location where we had another group working that was laying that out and then watering it in. So actually it was very well organized. We had a good group doing it. So, but that's, something you can do if you've got a good established grass and you want to keep it, and but you're wanting to plant shrubs, just get a sod stripper and use that sod somewhere else. Percolation test, this is to check for drainage, to see if your soil is poorly drained or well drained. And so you're gonna dig a hole just about approximately 12 inches by 12 inches deep, fill the hole with water, let it drain, and then repeat that process one more time. And then if the water is not drained does not drain in less than an hour, the soil may need some drainage improvement. Usually if it's drained within a couple hours, you're okay. I guess the idea drainage time would be about 8 hours. You want that water to be out of that hole by about 8 hours. If you still got water sitting in there after about 8 hours or 24 hours, you know you've got a problem, and you're either going to have to amend the soil, you're going to have to do some raised beds, or select plants that like to live in a wet area. So you don't necessarily have to dig out all your soil just because it's not well drained. You can make plant selections that will live in those soil conditions. So proper spacing is important. If plants are too close, they can lead to diseases and other problems. Those plants need air movement to dry off. And if you've got an irrigation system, you want to make sure that you use like little bubblers or a soaker hose. You don't want constant overhead watering, because the longer that foliage stays wet, the more likely you're going to have fungal diseases. Okay, so you want to water at the bottom, at the roots. Now, I like to take my plants, especially evergreens that tend to get spider mites, and about once a week, I will just go out and I'll give them a good hard spray with the water hose. Yeah, I'll just wash them off. And I do the same thing in my garden with my tomatoes and peppers and things like that. If I've got aphids, I will get in there and I'll hold up that plant and I'll just literally give it a bath and try to wipe those insects off and such like that. So that's kind of a natural control that you can do. And you do it early enough in the day that the leaves have time to dry before night comes. But that can help, giving them a good hard shot of water. So in contrast, you don't want to plant them too close, but if you plant them too far apart, the garden's going to look sparse. Everywhere you have bare spots, there's going to be weed seeds come up. So you're going to want to mulch or put down a ground cover or something. But just remember, when you buy that plant in its little 1 gallon container or its little 1 4-inch container, look at its mature size, because if it's a big plant, it's going to get big and you've got to make room to accommodate it. So let's say you've got a tree and you want to plant it near your house. Maybe let's say it's a maple tree that's it'll be 50 foot tall, have a 30-foot spread. How far do you think you would plant that away from your house? 10 feet? 15? Okay, about 15 foot. About 15 foot. And that way it stays away from your foundation, and it won't get up on the roof of your plant. Hopefully you're getting it away from power lines too. So, and even smaller plants, like if you've got a little boxwood and it says it's going to be 3 foot at mature height, you're going to want to plant that about 3 foot away from the foundation of the plant, and so on and so forth. Okay. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions? Okay. I don't see anything in the chat, so good. Okay. Now, again, site selection, your spacing of plants. You don't want to put your plants out in straight rows like little toy soldiers. You want to stagger your plantings. So as you can see here on the screen, we've staggered. You do 1 row and then the next row goes, it staggers at in between. And then as those plants grow, they will fill in and they will cover that whole area. And then you'll have what we call, 50-mile-an-hour view. Somebody that goes by your house fast is really going to notice that. It's going to be bright. It's going to be full. So if you leave, and again, if you leave too much open space, you're going to have weed problems. So follow the planting recommendations on the spacing, but stagger them instead of putting them all just in straight rows as you go along. So ground covers, we talked a little bit about that. They can be used as a background. They can be used as the floor. We usually in landscape design, we talk about the ceiling, the walls, and the floor. Okay, we have the sky can be your ceiling, an arbor can be your ceiling. The floor can be a hardscape, the floor could be your turf grass. It could be your ground cover. So you think of it as an outdoor room with walls and ceilings and a floor. And so that makes it the whole composition of it. So you could usually want to put your taller plants in the back, of course. And so like if you were to use Joe Pye weed, that would go in the back, then maybe purple coneflower, foxglove, dill, ornamental grasses, tall phlox, and some onion, something like that, that's going to be staggered. So they're not shading each other. And it just depends on where you're planting this. Some of these things, you're thinking of a foundation planting right in front of your house, this concept may not work as well. But if you've got an island out in the middle of your yard, you may want to start out with the tallest ones in the center and just work your way down and around. So it depends on what you want to create, how you put them out, but do be considerate of the size of the plants at maturity. Consider putting some cascading or weeping forms of plants in with your taller plants, maybe some rounded or shrubby forms. And like I said, your colors, Artemisia, rosemary, catnip, those things that really don't flower, make a pretty flower, those are still neutral colors in the landscape. And they can help kind of soften edges and just kind of bring everything together. And also, don't be afraid to toy with using edible herbs right in your landscape. As I was mentioning, before, when you're doing bed preparation, maybe on a new house to you, put your garden right in the foundation. I mean, I did that for 3 years at the house we had out in the country. And, I was finally at the point where I was starting to put in, my landscape shrubs, the permanent things. But I had tomatoes growing out front. I had herbs growing out front. I had to walk past them every day. So we were picking them. They were getting watered on a regular basis. I figured out how to make a little screen. I took sweet peas early in the spring, and I took a string and went across the front porch. And I just tied those sweet peas up on that string. And then when we sat on the porch, we could look out and we were kind of seeing through the flowers. It was just a neat view. You just got to kind of get creative and think about your views that you want to see from your porch. But yeah, all plants have different shapes, characteristics. But I like putting a lot of edible plants in the landscape. I want it to have a use. If I can't eat it, then it's going to provide shade. It might provide food for wildlife, but the annuals stuffed in there, they're still pretty. They're pretty. Aesthetics is a good reason too. So here's some of our vertical accent plants here. We've got some allium, and then we've got some ground cover here. I think that's a mix of sedum, and I'm not sure what that one is up in the corner there. So planting times. I'm sorry, my kid, dry throat. And planting times, you want to consider your planting times with your ornamentals, just like you would with your vegetable gardens. Okay, everything has a season. So Tennessee, our average last frost date is April 15th. It's been much later than that. The last 2 or 3 years, we've gone right up into May and had late freezes. So you've got to be careful. Don't necessarily go by the dates that are written. It's kind of, follow, what the weather forecast is going to be. Follow your farmer's almanac and look for different signs on when it's time to plant different plants. So your cold hardy annuals, you can plant it through September through October. When planted in early spring, they're going to be short-lived due to heat stress. So you want to plant those, like we were talking about, the pansies, cabbage, the kale, plant them along with your bulbs. And that way they'll come up in the spring and then they'll be gone by the time they're heat stressed. They'll just, the tops die back, or you'll replace them with warm season. So your warm season annuals would then go out about mid-April to June as those cool season ones start to go out. And even biennials and perennials, the ideal time for planting is either going to be in the fall, after the hot days have passed, or early in the spring. You can dig and divide them early in the spring also. I like to get things out before the end of April, going into mid-May, just to make sure that they do have their root system established before they have to deal with our extreme heat or extreme cold. So just have to watch your seasons. Now, planting and transplanting. It's said that you can plant containerized perennials any time of the year as long as water is provided. And that is pretty much true. It's going to be a little bit high maintenance if you plant your container plants in July and August instead of planting them early in the spring. They don't tend to establish as well. But if you don't have a choice, your house, you build a new house, it's done at that time, you may have to just go ahead and plant some just to have something to hold your soil in place. Your perennials, dig and divide early spring, early fall, and that way those plants become established before experience the harsh winter temperatures or the hot sunlight. Now, buying plants, after you've done your site selection, you've kind of got a design idea in mind, then you're headed to the garden center. Look for a reputable nursery or garden center that has healthy plants and that those plants are compatible with the environment that you have. Now, I know everybody likes to hit the 25-cent plant rack, but sometimes you can be buying into a problem. A lot of your annuals, actually, the reason they end up on the cheap plant rack is because they've got some type of a root rot disease. They're not looking good. They go down very quickly. So if they don't look healthy, nobody's going to buy them. And then they put them on the 50-cent rack and everybody says, ooh, I want that plant. And you take that plant home and you put it in the ground and then you introduce the disease into your garden. So be very careful. I like to pull the plants out of its container and check them out, make sure that they're healthy. If I do buy off the cheap rack, I try to keep those plants away from my healthy plants for a little while. I will isolate them. I'll trim them back. I may put some insecticidal soap on them. I'll check the roots. If the roots are all slimy, like they've got a disease or something, I'll just go ahead and toss them out because I don't want to introduce an insect or a disease into the garden. So sometimes you can find some good deals. Sometimes you can't. But just kind of, like I said, isolate those plants, get them healthy, then put them into your garden. So you want to select plants that are uniform, balanced to the size of the container. You want to, when you're doing a foundation planting, you want to start out with, your plants being pretty much the same size so it looks uniform. So you may have to just kind of pick and choose. And I tell you, I think they hate it when I go into garden centers because I'll grab plants from here and there and here and there, and I'll start kind of lining them up the way that I think they would look at home. And I'll pop the side of the container and make sure the roots are healthy and put them back. I always try to put things back where they belong. I don't just leave them in the aisle. But, I like to look and get the plants that are uniform, that are balanced. I don't want ones that are weak or elongated. They're kind of floppy looking, or if they're diseased looking, you just don't want those. And check to make sure that they're not root bound. Sometimes you can score them and you'll still be okay. Just depends on the type of plant, how tough a plant it is. So, and resist that temptation to choose plants with the most flowers because you want it to flower after you get it into your landscape. So if you know the color, you think the tag's right, maybe a few are blooming, just to make sure that you're getting the right color, select those, but resist that temptation to buy those plants that are in full bloom, because they're going to be in full bloom and they're going to be gone faster than you want them to. So let's see. Most plants, if it's a continuing flowering plant, you can deadhead it, cut them back. Your cone flowers, gosh, zinnias, a lot of these flowers can be deadheaded and they will continue to bloom throughout the year. So again, select plants with healthy foliage, good color, look for insect damage, areas that are discolored, that are dark, if it's got spots, rust colored, if it looks like it's got rust on it. If it's a true rust disease, you can literally just take your finger. If it rubs off, that means it's got a rust disease and you probably don't want to buy that. Look for insects, especially aphids. Because sometimes, when they come into the garden centers, if they weren't treated at the nursery where they were grown, they can come in with insects in them. So you may buy a plant that's got aphids on it, you put it out there and then boom, aphids everywhere. So, just kind of inspect them. But aphids, spider mites, mealybugs, white flies, scale, those are just some of the things that you should look for when you're buying plants. And like I said, tap them, shake them, look at the roots. Just tell them you're a master gardener. You can do it. If the Lowe's employee comes over and says, no, say, oh, master gardener, I can do this. Again, inspect that root system to make sure the roots are healthy. Just gently remove it from the container. You're not going to damage the plant. Just gently inspect it, put it back in there. When you're getting ready to plant, you kind of press the outside of that container, loosen the roots. You can tap it on the ground or tap it on your hand and pull it out easily. If they are root bound, you can score them with a spade or a knife or a trowel, whatever kind of sharp tool that you have. So but if you see a plant that has brown discolored roots, if they're kind of slimy, and sometimes they'll even have a smell, kind of almost like a alcohol bacterial odor to them, that means they've got some kind of a disease and you don't want them. And so your healthy roots on your plants are going to be pretty white, maybe kind of off-white colored, but they're not going to be black and slimy for sure. On planting, cloudy or overcast days are best for planting. If you can get out in the mornings, before the sun hits real hard and, it gets hot, get those plants in the ground, get them watered, try to avoid hot, windy days. Because that just dries them out. And these plants, you got to remember, just like trees, when we talked about planting trees and other woody ornamentals, buy the plants from the nursery, well, they've been babied, they've been watered every day. So when you put these in the ground, if we're not getting any natural rainfall, you need to water them every day until they get established and can make it on their own. And you want to water deeply, make sure that the ground is getting soaked about 6 to 8 inches down. But these plants are very spoiled to being watered every day. So you've got to watch that. You can plant, start watering every day, then every other day until you're down to watering once a week. So you also want to avoid walking or digging in your flower beds. Once you get them, prepare your planting beds, you can compact the soil by getting out there and walking in it while it's muddy or, even slightly damp. That just ruins its structure. So try to stay out of the soggy soil if you can. Plants should be planted at the same level they were growing in their containers. So it's kind of like the trees, we told you to look for the root flare and not bury the root flare. It would be the same thing, with a geranium or another type of plant. Just plant them only as deep as they were in the container. You can plant tomatoes deeper. That's kind of an exception to the rule. But as I said, if the roots are tightly bound, you can bust up that root ball, score it. But all your plants need to be watered after you put them in the ground. Even if the weatherman says it's going to rain that afternoon, never trust the weatherman. That's the only person that can have a job that can be right only 50% of the time. Isn't that what they say? Or something like that. So you make sure you go ahead and water those at planting so they will establish well. Okay. we want to manage our soil. We've talked about that. Compost, organic matter is going to increase the ability of the soil to infiltrate the water. Holding water is vitally important to plant survival, but you don't want it to hold on for too long. You do want it to drain eventually. So you're going to look at management steps that you can take to improve the overall soil to water relationship. So your site preparation includes addressing that compaction and drainage issues and plant selection. Okay. If you can, try to plant plants together by their water use needs. So you may have an area that you have plants that are going to need water just about every day, or they'll wilt on you. Keep them all in one spot so that you can just water those, and maybe another area you don't have to water that day. It's going to need less water. So if you can group them by water use need, that will help you maintain the garden. And then of course, using organic mulches are useful. I am not one for fabric, weed barrier fabric. You definitely do not use plastic, does not degrade. Even the weed barrier fabric, it's made to be strong, it's made to be thick, but the water and the air movement does not go through it like it should. Okay. So if you put landscape barrier fabric down around your trees, and then you start to see your trees kind of going downhill, you'll start to pull off that fabric, and you're going to see that your roots you've been just bunched up, and they're right up there against that landscape barrier fabric. And that's because that is causing a barrier, and it's not allowing the water to get down into the ground where you want the roots to grow. So there's very few conditions that I would recommend a weed barrier fabric. Okay. By using organic mulches, it also allows you to dig and move your plants around easier. I always said I move my plants more than I move my furniture. A lot of people like to arrange their furniture different every year. Well, it's plants with me. I'll plant it one place, and then the next thing you know, it's like, nope, I'm going to move you. You're going to a different area. So anyway, but that's why I like using the mulches that break down. So you can't do that. You can't move them around very well if you got weed barrier fabric. So, but over time, mulches are going to encourage the soil organisms, those good soil organisms that we want in the soil, enhances your water holding capacity, supplies nutrients for the plants. And over time, these practices, you're going to have better soil structure, and it's going to reduce the need for inputs in the landscape. It's going to reduce the need for watering and fertilization, because the plants are getting what they need from the soil. And then it also will help prevent runoff when you get a heavy rain, and such like that. Okay, I got ahead of myself. Okay, the weed barrier fabric or cloth. This practice is discouraged for several reasons. Okay, first, the plastic can reduce or prevent water from soaking into flower beds. That can lead to plant stress, death, or increased runoff. If you've got a weed barrier fabric and then you've got mulch on top of that, how's that water getting through? It's not, it's running off. So you want the water to be able to get down to the root system. The plants can be further stressed by that reduction of oxygen in the root zone, because it's not able to dry out as easy. And if you use an organic mulch, the weed barrier fabric, you can still get weeds. Okay, it'll start to decompose, but your weed seeds can be brought in by birds and by wind and grow on top of that weed barrier fabric, and that totally defeats the purpose. So you might as well just use an organic mulch and replenish it every year, and then just use tactics like we've spoke about keeping the weeds down, keeping them picked earlier. Use a pre-emergent. I don't care to use chemicals, but you can carefully spray the weeds to keep them under control, get them while they're young. So your soil or your water, plants will not survive without water. And I get these questions like, July and August. Okay, I guess one of our plant pathologists named it a flash drought. Okay, we get 2 weeks, okay, of hot, dry weather after having a long rainy period. Okay, just think about if you have enough water. Okay, you've got enough water every day. You've been drinking your gallon of water every day, and then all of a sudden, somebody, it's taken away from you. How long are you going to last without water? Not long. Not me. I get dehydrated very easily. So, but your trees and plants do too, especially after they've been spoiled because they've had natural rain or you've been irrigating them. Then all of a sudden you cut that off and your plants are going to start to go into a decline. So we recommend about 1.5 inches of water per week. I think that is hard to measure. When you water, you want to make sure, just take a spade, shovel, and make sure that you're watering 6 to 8 inches down, that you're wetting that soil 6 to 8 inches down. So if you've got a sprinkler system or irrigation system, you may have to do some timing, leave it on for 15 minutes, give it another 15 minutes for it to soak in, go out with your trowel, your spade, and see how far wetted, how far down the ground is wetted. And so that may help you set your controls on your irrigation system, how long to run it to get that amount of water that you need, rather than just turning it on for an hour in the morning and being done with it. So sometimes you may have to set it to go, 30 minutes in the morning, maybe 30 minutes in the afternoon, and 30 minutes in the early evening. But it takes some timing and watching what's going on to figure that out. And this is going to be dependent on the site, the type of plant, the type of soil. But take home message is thoroughly soak the plants. Don't give them a sprinkle baptism. You want to give them a thorough dunking. So, and the ideal time is to water as early in the morning. Myself, I have trouble with that because I got to get up and go to work in the morning. I'm not a morning person. So usually my plants get watered about between 4:30 and 5:30, which is generally okay because in the summer months, they do have time to dry off. And I also try just to wet the plants at the ground level if I can, and do some of those sort of things. But if you can water early in the morning, that's really the prime time. But you just want to make sure that you're not wetting the foliage and letting it stay wet overnight, because we have natural dew and that just adds extra water. Let me check the chat here real quick. Okay, yes. One person, be careful about using natives in flower beds. They will take over. Ditto for mints, daisies, bee balm, and lemon balm. Yes, that's true. How late would you recommend planting perennials in the fall? We are about to reach that point. We are getting into where we've got some freezing temperatures. And then today, what did it do? It jumped up in the 70s. And so as it would still be okay, I think, but it's going to be kind of risky at going through this time of the year. I'd rather see everything go into dormancy and get your plants moved by late October, mid-November. So you may still be okay at this time of the year. I mean, I know I have transplanted in July and actually they've lived. So it just depends on your green thumb, I think. So. All right, fertilizing. Do make sure you invest in a soil test. And I like to recommend our lab. It's not just because that's who I work for, but you get a good recommendation based on the plant that you're going to grow. It's going to give you your pH. It's going to give you an establishment and a maintenance plan. You're not just getting, hey, your pH is 6.5 and no other recommendations. Okay, they go by the crop, the plant that you're going to be planting. And then they make those recommendations based on what the plant needs. So at planting, you can put down a fertilizer that's kind of a starter fertilizer that's very low in nitrogen, it's higher in phosphorus, it's higher in potassium. And the phosphorus and potassium are going to, those are going to help with the root establishment. Potassium helps with the stalk strength, your stems on your plant, and resistance to diseases helps them get started. And it also increases your flower and fruit production. So you can have water soluble, slow release. Those are two common ones. We have like the Miracle Grow, the Peters, just the water soluble ones that you just spray on maybe once a week when you water. If you want something slow release that lasts longer, you might use Osmocote or a similar one. And they're just pellets, they're coated, and they break down over a certain amount of time. And usually on the label, it will tell you to replenish in 90 days or replenish in 120 days. Well, if you're irrigating on a regular basis, you may have to fertilize a little bit more often. Okay. Or if we're getting a lot of rain and those fertilizers are leaching away, you may have to just kind of adjust that to what's going on in the environment. But I like using the slow release fertilizer. You work those in. And so they do tend to last a little bit longer, but if you need to green up your plants, they're yellowing, you want to green them up, then you can just do an overspray with with a liquid, a soluble liquid fertilizer. You want to choose species and cultivars that are well suited to our environment here in Tennessee, and also those that have genetic resistance against common pests and diseases. You want to have proper moisture, fertilizer management that further sustains the good health of the plants, and scouting the plants each day or every other day, just scouting. That's one of the best methods of pest control. You can catch early, and you're not looking just for pests. You're looking for insects, diseases, weeds, so you can catch them all early and get them under control at the prime time. So, and it's important to identify the disease or the pest, okay, the insect that you're trying to control. Because it could be just a cultural problem and rather than a disease or an insect. So you can always bring a sample in Montgomery County, you can bring it here. We've got some people in other counties, take it to your county extension agent, let us look at them. Most of us have little microscopes at our desk where we can look closely at a plant and identify the easy ones. You can see the aphids and the spider mites or leaf miners and things like that. If you have a root rot disease, it may come to the point where we have to send it into the lab, and that's just a $15 charge if we send it into the lab. The distance diagnostics does not cost anything right now, but that could always change. And I use it a lot. I think just by doing this for 23 years, I've learned a lot, and I can identify a lot of insects and diseases, but many times I want to have backup. And I want to send that to the pathologist and let them look at it and, tell me if I'm right or wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. And that way I'll know then, what to look for. So, but we can help you out with that. So mulching, we talked about the organic mulches. You can use mulch in combination with like a pre-emergent herbicide to keep those weeds under control. Hand removal on a regular basis. It just make sure you're removing them while they're small before they go to flower or before they put seeds down, so that you don't create a problem for the next year. And your pre-emergent herbicides, they only work on the seeds that have not germinated yet. They keep them, the little seed starts to germinate and the herbicide hits it and it kills it. Okay. If the weed is already up, or already at a certain point of germination, a pre-emergent will not work. You'll have to wait until that weed comes up and then spot spray it with a spray chemical, or just pull it by hand. So, and always, always, always read and follow those label directions. We have some chemicals that are available that you can spray over the top of certain ornamentals and perennials, but read the label, because they're all going to be listed on there, and the ones that they will damage, the plants that they will damage, will be listed on the label too. So just be very careful, follow your label instructions there. Sometimes chemical weed control with your nut sedge, those are very hard to control in the landscape beds once they get it established. And so this one right up here in the corner, the right hand corner, is the nut sedge. There's purple nut sedge and yellow nut sedge. You can use Basagran and Manage to control those. And then for Bermuda grass, you're going to have Bermuda grass suppression. There's nothing that will kill Bermuda grass completely. I think we talked about that in our turf talk. You can beat it back, you can spray it and knock it back a little bit, but you're not going to kill it without using some really harsh stuff and redoing your whole lawn. So if you need to use these, grass getter, post, grass be gone, something like that at the edges of your landscape bed to just suppress that Bermuda grass and keep it from growing in there. Keep an edge on your garden. I used to have a Manus tiller and it gave out on me, but I got a Manus tiller with all the little parts on it, and it had an edger that you could hook on. And so a couple times a year, I would just go around and it just cuts you an edge. And then you rake back the weeds and kind of just keep a little trench going right next to your landscape beds. All right, we'll go a few more minutes and then take a break. Okay, starting seeds indoors. We talked a little bit about this. Use a soilless potting mix like Pro Mix. Personally, I like the Pro Mix with mycorrhiza. And so I even use the Pro Mix when I'm planting out in my garden beds. I will take a little bit of the Pro Mix or potting mix, and I'll kind of mix that with the native soil and plant the plant in there. So adding the potting soil as you plant kind of helps improve your soil overall. But if you're starting seeds inside, you can get these seed trays, or you can use things that you've got around the house. I save like, Subway containers, get Subway platters. I found that those work really good. They hold just enough soil to let them germinate, and they've got the top that goes on there. And then by the time they get about 2 inches tall, you need to transplant them into a bigger pot anyway. So just things like that, the plastic pie containers and things like that you can use rather than going out and buying a lot of expensive products. So, but you do want to use a good soilless planting mix. After the seeds, you guys can't see the picture. Okay. After the seeds have germinated, then they can be transplanted into cell pots or cell packs, peat pots, or other small containers. Peat pots, you've got to be careful because you miss that transplanting part. Most people will just use the little peat pot. They'll put the seed in there right on the top, and then they'll let it grow, and then it'll get about this tall and it starts falling over. So really, if you're going to use peat pots, you need to kind of take a pencil or take some kind of tool and gently push that plant back down to the bottom. And that makes, push that stalk in there to where the true leaves are showing at the top, and let them grow from there. Or just take your whole peat pot and move it to a 4-inch pot, something like that. Okay. You just don't want a long, leggy stem. Okay. Makes for a stronger plant. Let's see. We're going to talk about lighting. The peat pots, when you do bury them in the garden, make sure that you bury them completely. I like to just break them up a little bit because they will wick water away from the plant, just from the material that they're made out of. If that's left in there, it can wick the water away and your plant will die. So I just kind of crumple it up and make sure that it's wetted down real good and just kind of incorporate it into the ground. So of course, water is the first step for germination. So your seeds have to have water. I don't like to water over the top. What we recommend is to kind of do a pot in a pot type thing. And you can buy these at the store, the trays that don't have holes in the bottom. And then you have your seed packs, or like 4-packs or 6-packs. And you just set that down inside another container that's full of water, let the water come up from the underneath, let them sit for about 30 minutes and then dump off any excess water that you have left. So, because if you try, like this point here in the middle, if you were trying to even gently water it over the top, you've washed out the middle, and you can see on the side there, you've kind of washed out the middle. And so if you water from the bottom, that prevents that from happening. And these plants here are getting big enough to where they need to be transplanted into larger pots. So, and also too much watering can promote the damping off. And that's where that's the root rot disease. And you'll see it right at the edge, it turns black and your plants will fall over. And so you don't want to get root rot in there. So the appropriate growing environment, if you think about it, cool season plants are going to germinate at a little bit lower temperature, around 60 degrees would be fine. Your warm season plants, your warm season seeds, they like, 75 to 80 degrees to germinate. And you can buy these little heat mats to put below your trays, and you set the temperature on them, and that can be very helpful. If you're just starting a few seeds, you might set them on top of the refrigerator where you've got some natural heat building up, put them on top of your dryer where you've got some natural heat. So like I said, different things that you can do to, use items that you have around the house. So, but the heating mats really are not that expensive once you've invested in them. They last for years. All right. Now, another thing about starting seeds indoors, they need light. So we think Roy G. Biv, we learned, I could sing the Dr. Seuss song, but I won't torture y'all. Everybody knows the song, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, followed by blue. Okay, so red and blue have the most impact on plant growth. Green is the least effective because basically the green is just a reflection of the chlorophyll molecules in the plant. Blue is going to encourage vegetative growth, and red combined with blue encourages flowering. And believe me, this light thing can get very complicated. Especially when you're growing poinsettias, you're growing like your Christmas cactuses and things like that really have specific light requirements. This can be very important. I think it's just important to remember to use fluorescent lamps. Don't use incandescent bulbs. Most of us don't use those anymore anyway. The incandescent bulbs don't provide the red and the blue, and they also get too hot. So just a fluorescent light or a grow lamp that has a mixture of those red and blue colors are going to be the best. And you want to keep the light as close to the plants as possible. So you can rig up some things like you see in the corner here, and where you can raise that light up and down as the plants grow. So you're going to put it as close to the plants as possible, and then you just keep moving up and up and up until your plants are really ready to be acclimated to go outdoors. So you don't want to keep it so close that you're burning them, but you don't want them to have the light so high up that they're getting leggy and they're going from side to side. So this is going to give you a short, stocky, healthy plant. So, okay. Humidity, okay, it's not necessary for germination. We know water is necessary for germination, but humidity just reduces the evaporation, and that reduces the potential for water stress. And so when we first start our seeds, we like to cover them with a plastic cover. And if you see too much condensation in there, you just lift that up, and I usually just let it trickle back on the plants. You're giving them back a little bit of water. So, but you can open them up, let them dry out a little bit, and then put the lid back down on them. You can use plastic bags. You can, like I said, you can buy these things, the little grow tents and grow labs, different things like that, or just use things that you've got around the house. Saving seeds. You can collect seeds at specific times of the year. You just want to make sure that you dry them correctly. And you want to, you've just got to kind of pick, when the right time to grab those seeds and to store them. You can put them in a canning jar with a lid, a Ziploc bag, or other sealed containers. Make sure that you mark them, label them as to what they are so that you'll remember. And you can save those little desiccant packages, like sometimes you buy leather boots or you buy a leather purse, or even in some medications, vitamins, they'll have those little desiccant packets. You can put that in with your seeds, and that will help absorb some of that extra water. And I like putting mine in the freezer, and that excluding corn seed. Corn seed, you just want to keep in a cool, dry location, because if you freeze the germ on a corn seed, it will not germinate. So you want, but most of them, they will stay in dormancy, put in the refrigerator. Just make sure they're in a sealed package, marked, and all that good stuff. Some seeds will last for several years. Others, the germination rate's going to go down every year. For a plant like corn, sorghum, the germination rate goes down very quickly. So you can't save those seeds for very long. So. Okay, are y'all needing a break yet? Okay, let's take about a 10-minute break when y'all can walk around a little bit. And I see some sleepy eyes. All right, 10-minute break. And if anybody has any questions, y'all can put it in the chat box, or you can ask me now.
Carla, this is Kay. I'm
Yes.
wondering if you start seeds in a peat pot, that you don't fill it up, and then when it gets up to where it has the leaves and you would normally replant it, can you add soil to fill up that peat pot?
You can. Most of the peat pots, that when they come as a little flat cube,
Yeah.
and you put water in them and they go, they expand. So your best bet is to try to put the seed down as deeply as possible, or once they come up and they're about 2 inches tall and you've got the first 2 true leaves, you'll have the cotyledons that come out first.
Right.
And then you'll have the actual true leaves. When it's got the true leaves is when you transplant. You can very carefully take a pencil or some type of small object and just push those roots down to the bottom, and maybe add some more soil to the top, just to make sure that stalk is covered with soil.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and you had talked in your presentation about using a pencil to push it down, and I was like, that sounds a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, it does. You've got to get it right next to, you got to do it very carefully. You kind of find the little root ball, and you can catch the root ball, and then you just kind of push gently. But it works using a pencil or something like with a point on it, kind of, gives you ability to wiggle it around a little bit.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh. And yes, I am feeling a lot better, y'all. Have a comment in there says it looks like I'm feeling better. I am feeling better. I whooped the COVID. Okay, well, I'm going to step away for just a minute and I'll be right back. Okay, well, I am back and I think we are ready to go. Let me do ask, are you all out there in Zoom land seeing my notes again? Just tell me yes or no.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes, ma'am, we are. I am.
Okay,
Yes.
They have to.
Yes.
now you're good, right? Okay. Should just be seeing the slideshow. Okay, so now we're going to talk about bulbs and bulb-like plants. Our plants have several different types of storage organs. And so some definitions here: a bulb is basically a large modified, it's a large modified bud with a vertical stem and leaves and crowded into almost a spherical body. So a bulb, you think of tulips, daffodils, lilies, narcissus, and amaryllis. A corm is a solid vertical swollen stem, and new corms develop annually from the lateral buds, and that's how they spread and make new plants. So gladiolus, crocus, autumn crocus are all corms. And so if you ever dig those up and you see the little babies on the side, you can plant those and they'll become new plants, and that's how they reproduce. Even on your bulbs, they will come up on the side. That's how you can start new tulips or start new daffodils, such like that. A rhizome is a modified horizontal stem that's in the soil or right on the soil surface. So one of your common rhizome type plants would be your calla lily, cannas, bearded iris, and water lilies. And then you have tubers, tuberous plants like dahlia and caladium. They're gonna lie just below the soil surface and have part of an old stem at one end. So that's your dahlias, begonias, caladiums, and anemones. Your irises, it would also be a rhizome. And of course, your irises like to be right on the surface of the soil. If you've buried them too deeply, you may get rot. There's the iris borer. It's an insect that gets into them. So you don't want to bury them very deeply. They just like to be right on the soil surface, and don't mulch too thickly either. So, because you want to be able to see part of that horizontal stem coming out of the ground, and that's fine on a bed of irises, because they like to breathe. So bulbs prefer a well-drained soil in full sun, if they're a full sun loving bulb, but we also have woodland bulbs that prefer the partial shade. So you can improve the texture of your heavy wet soils by digging in some organic matter. Supplement your poor soils with a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio fertilizer, or just follow your soil test recommendations. And after flowering, allow that foliage to die back naturally, because it's still going through photosynthesis, and it's building up energy, and it's storing the sugars and the energy for the next year, so that it can come back and flower real pretty for you. And so I don't see people doing this as much, but I notice, people will tie the leaves back. Like after the daffodils have bloomed, they will tie them back so they don't have to look at the ugly stuff. Well, and I mean, that is really killing it, because it's not going through photosynthesis as well anymore. So just leave them up as long as you can stand to look at them. That's what I usually tell people, and then cut them back. But just don't tie them in knots or leaves or anything like that. So you want them to build up as much energy and store that food as possible, so that they come back and are real pretty for the next year's growth. Now, some bulbs you may need to dig up and dry and store. Some of our tender bulbs, gladiola, dahlias, tuberous begonias. You want to dig those in November. And a tender bulb just refers to a plant that has a fleshy storage organ, and either bulb, corm, tuber, roots, which would be killed by cold winters if not brought indoors. And being where we're at in Tennessee, we're like on the borderline for these things. I have had my dahlias killed back. Gladiolas are usually fine. I mean, I don't think I've ever dug my gladiolas. Even when I lived in Missouri, I left them out and they came back. But dahlias, you would want to dig those up, and the tuberous begonias, because they're going to be tender. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to dig. So you want to dig carefully. And this goes, to if you're just getting ready to dig and replant, maybe you've got an area ready, you're going to dig, divide, you're going to move them. Dig carefully for all the structures. Try to make sure that you're not causing any damage. It's inevitably going to happen, whether you're using a fork or shovel, you're going to damage those roots probably. If you do damage one, just toss it or put it back in the ground, because you don't want to store one that has an injury on it, or it's kind of like the one bad apple will kill the whole bunch. So, it will get diseases and rot and spread to the rest of them. So if you do happen to injure one, like I said, just put it back in the ground and hopefully it will heal up. Don't try to store it. Some plants are best washed gently with a hose, but if you can avoid getting those wet, they're going to cure better. They're going to cure faster. Okay. Because you want them to dry out and kind of, be like an onion on the outside, and then you're going to store them. So, but if it's really muddy and you're out there digging, you've just gone out on a wet day and decided, hey, I'm going to dig these up. You may want to lay them out on a table. A screen where they can get air through is really better. If you can lay them out on something and let them dry, after you've washed off the soil, most of the time you can just let them dry and just shake that soil off. You just don't want them wet if you're going to store them. So curing, the drying and curing temperatures and the time kind of depends on what the plant is. So usually it's rather short time period, just a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks, but you'll lay them out. Here's an example of a table. It's got some air movement around it. It's got some holes for air movement, but 60 to 70 degrees in a dry, well ventilated area is going to be fine. And you may want to put a little fan on them if they're, like I said, if they're really wet and you had to rinse the mud off of them, or things like that. You may want to put a fan on them to make sure that they've got good air movement. You can dust with an insecticide, fungicide mixture. If you are afraid of insects, if you think there might be insects in there, you can go ahead and treat them. Normally, if you let them dry out, they're going to be okay. But as long as they don't have an injury on them. So, storage. Label your plant materials. Okay, you may just want to put them in cardboard boxes. Some people will put them in bags. You can put a little straw, a little peat moss, something that help absorb the extra moisture. But label them if you know what color they are. Especially like if you're gathering a certain type of iris that you're going to give to the plant sale or give to somebody for planting next spring. Make sure you label them. But you want to handle them carefully and just don't, try not to cause any injuries. Okay, and our spring flowering bulbs, planting time. When you have spring flowering bulbs, you want to plant the season before they bloom. So we've got, how to get rid of that thing. So we got tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, crocuses, and your irises. Now you're going to plant those in the fall and they will bloom in the spring. And so essentially how deep you plant them is the size of the bulb itself. So you plant them 2 to 3 times as deep as the diameter of the bulb. So rule of thumb, if the bulb is like just an inch around, you're going to plant it about 2.5 inches deep. If it's 2 inches around, you're going to plant it about 4.5 inches deep. So, but you do want to make sure that you get them well into the ground. You don't want to plant them at the surface. Like the larger bulbs, if you've got a huge tulip or a huge daffodil bulb, you don't want to put it right at the surface. You want to make sure that you're getting it down 2 to 3 times its diameter into the soil. And so here's the chart on that. Okay. Here you can see your bearded iris, your tuberous begonias. You know, they like to be pretty close to the surface. They like a lot of air. Your anemines are very small, so they're probably just going to be maybe a 1/2 inch around. So they're just going to go an inch below the surface. So again, just depends on the size of the bulb, how deep that you're going to plant it. Question. Okay, so Jennifer asked about braiding the daffodils. I don't recommend braiding or tying them. Just let them die back naturally as possible. Unless that's referring to drying them. I mean, you can braid them like garlic and dry them if that's what you're wanting to do. Kind of depends. Elephant ears. What about digging and storing elephant ears? Some of the elephant ears are very expensive. And so I kind of go by, you know, how much did I pay for this tender bulb? And if I'm going to dig it up and store it or not. Most of your elephant ears can be left in the ground. Some of them, just read the tags, maybe do a little research on them. You know, and if they're considered tender bulbs, then you're going to go ahead and want to dig them up and store them like we talked about. So, but the only elephant ears, well, I had a couple different ones die on me. I had one I got at the summer celebration. It was called Freckles. It was so pretty. And I went ahead and planted it. I didn't dig it up and it was gone. It didn't come back the next year. So I lost Freckles. Yeah, on the elephant ears. Yeah. Bob was saying to put a good layer of mulch over the top of them to help insulate. And in the spring, yeah, just kind of remove that. But you know, the leaves add organic matter, so that's going to be good for them. This is just another planting depth chart, just in color compared to the other ones. Again, just look at the size of the bulb or the corm or the tuber to decide how deep you want to plant that. Now, summer and fall planting bulbs, you know, as I said before, you plant them the season before they're going to flower. So our tulips and such were planted in the fall, but our summer and fall blooming bulbs are going to be planted in the spring, usually after our fear of frost is over. So April, May, you usually safe to put out your gladiola, or lilies, the dahlias, the begonias, and calla lily. And this is just a guide. It's gonna disappear. So again, like we talked about earlier, I think what this picture is depicting is just like your flowers in your landscape or your flowers, your shrubs, your combination. You have bulbs that are going to bloom early spring, mid-spring, late spring, summer, and into fall. So you can incorporate those into your landscape to where you have something of interest all year round. So again, pay attention to their flowering period so that when one is done, you might have something coming up right after it, and you're including it with your perennials and your annuals in your beds. Whoops, sorry. So common problems and stresses with ornamental or herbaceous plants in the landscape. You know, even with the best of care, you can have problems. I mean, it's trial and error, like we said earlier. Yeah, you have stress like snails and slugs, insects, diseases, household pests can cause trouble from time to time. Tulips, I almost consider annuals because the chipmunks or the gophers or whatever, seem to always get in there and eat them, and my tulips never come back, or very rarely. Or I'll plant a dozen and maybe one or two will come back, and they've either rotted in the ground or something's gotten in there and eaten them. So every plant is going to have its pest. It's going to have an insect disease that's going to attack it. So some of the common stresses we see, too much or too little light for the plant's requirements, too much or too little water, overcrowding, poor nutrition, poor soil. And your stress on your plants can be decreased by properly preparing the soil, purchasing healthy plants, correctly spacing those plants, providing adequate water, and well, it says it twice, adequate and sufficient water. So when it comes down to selecting appropriate plants, we use the word sustainable a lot. And so sustainable just means something that's going to last a long time with very little care. That's kind of what I think of as sustainable, something that's going to sustain itself after you get it planted. So you want to select your plants to reduce inputs into the environment. You want to reduce pollution. And of course, a lot of our plants are good filters. They filter the air, the pollution out of the air for us. They can filter out heavy metals from the soil. And so these plants are little worker bees, they really do a lot for us. So when you're thinking about overall management in a landscape, keep these concepts of sustainability in mind. You want to conserve your natural resources. And what we talked about earlier was planting plants with similar water use, in certain areas. Plants with similar light requirements, plant them in groupings together, will help you on your maintenance, on your management of those plants. You want to maximize their ecological function. And when I think about that, I think of what is it providing? Is it providing shade, like a shade tree? Is it providing something to eat? Is it just providing an aesthetic value? Is it just there to be attractive? Is it there for something, a critter to eat? Okay, so they always have some kind of ecological function in the landscape. And just by being there and having the roots in the ground, they're working with those mycorrhiza and fungal organisms that are in the ground and making your soil healthier. So garden maintenance is necessary. There is not such a thing as a no maintenance garden. And that's another question that I get a lot. What can I plant and I don't have to worry about it? Grass, maybe, plastic flowers. There's just, there are low maintenance plants, but there's no maintenance plants. So you do have to plan on a little bit of care for them. But if your garden has gotten so big that it's just a job, maybe you need to cut it back a little bit. If it feels like work and it's not pretty to you anymore, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I got to get out there and pull weeds again, maybe it's time to kind of downsize a little bit, give some of those plants to the plant sale. Most plants will benefit, by maintaining, cutting back, pinching, deadheading, dividing, as well as the weeding and the edging that we talked about before. All these things are going to keep your plants looking good and being healthy. And this picture here just has several different types of basil. And so to keep it, looking like this, you would just harvest it on a regular basis and you would use it. You can freeze basil, you can dry it, you can use it fresh, you can make pesto, with a lot of herbs. So I like incorporating the herbs into the landscape environment so that they can have a beneficial use to them. But just kind of definitions, cutting back at this time of the year, we've had our first good hard freeze. And so, your peonies, your coneflowers, canna, all those things can be cut back right now and do a little garden cleanup. But I will say, you can leave some debris on the ground, leave some of the leaves, because there's a lot of natural predators and beneficial insects that live in that debris in the ground. And so you don't want to sweep it completely clean. Okay. Like blow all the leaves out and everything to where you've got bare ground. Leave some leaves, leave some kind of ground cover for these good insects to live in. So, and then your grasses, you want to leave those through the winter time and leave the plumes for winter interest, and then cut them back early in the spring. Master gardener Jim Willard showed me a good trick years ago, especially once the ornamental grasses get really big. He takes a piece of rope and ties it around it, and then he'll take his shears or even a chainsaw, depending on how thick the clump is, and just cut it off right above that string, and then whew, you've got it right there. So it comes off really easy, and you can remove it very quickly. And ornamental grasses, that would make good mulch too. So you could actually just spread it out in the garden and let it compost. Pinching just removing that growing point back to about 1.5 inches to 1 inch above a leaf, and that stimulates the side roots shoots to grow. Deadheading throughout the season, you can deadhead your plant, just remove those faded blooms and withering blooms, and they will continue to come back. I like to mention with deadheading, I know we're talking about herbaceous, but with our roses, what is the famous rose? Knockout. Yes, I'm sorry. I was just drawing a blank there. I'm sorry. The knockout roses have a tendency to get the rosette disease on them. And so if you can trim those back throughout the season, and that goes for all roses, just go ahead and trim those blooms out and don't let them fall to the ground, because the insect that causes the rose rosette disease lives in the petiole of the plant. So if you leave those spent blooms on the plant, you're going to have rose rosette even worse the next year, because they're going to overwinter and they're going to live. And so if you can take those cuttings, bag them up, burn them, get rid of them, then you're going to have less problems the next year. There is really no cure for rose rosette, but you can prevent it throughout the season just by cutting back, thinning, deadheading, doing things like that, and making the roses look better. And many, the knockout roses, people just let them go. I mean, every plant needs pruned a little bit each year, or it's going to get out of control. But with that one, you can help control the diseases too by deadheading. So weeding is going to be necessary in every garden. It's good exercise. Think about that. Weeds can be unsightly, but they also compete for nutrients. We don't want them in the garden. You can use a well-mulched garden. It's going to help you to control those weeds. They keep them from germinating. Remember, it takes sunlight and water for a seed to germinate. And so if you can keep the sunlight from those weed seeds, you're going to keep them from germinating. So if you could use different type of mulches, maybe use your pre-emergent herbicides, but those weeds should be pulled out as best as you can. Try to get as much of the root system as you can, and definitely get them out before they flower and seed and make a seed bed. So edging is another part of garden maintenance. I mentioned that earlier. You can get edging machines, or you can do it by hand if you're really energetic. I kind of like the little Mantis tiller. Even without putting the edger on it, I could take that tiller, and it has 2 sets of tines, and I could just tip it on the side and go along my landscape beds and just dig that trench, and then go along with a rake, and I would pull back the Bermuda grass and all that good stuff, and sometimes hit it with a little bit of Roundup, just to keep it out of the beds. And that also makes it easier when you're mowing, because I could tell my ex-mower that he could put one wheel into the garden bed on on the lawnmower. When he'd go around, I said, you could put one wheel in this hole and that's going to weed my bed and edge it, rather than him leaving, this much space and me having to go pull weeds right at the edge. So it worked out pretty good when he did. So, but edging is good. Bricks, flagstones, gravel paths, also distinguish the green of the lawn. Your hardscape tells people how to get to your house. Okay, do you use the front door, or you want to lead people around to a side door? What entrance? I hate going to houses where I don't know where to go because there's no sidewalk. I go on a home visit and I'm like, there's a driveway, there's the yard, there's the door, but how do they want me to come in? You don't see a path. So, lead people to where you want them to come into your house. So hardscaping, we don't want to forget about that either. And here's just some interesting ideas. You can be more formal, you can be informal in your garden. That really depends on your taste. A lot of people will do a more formal type garden in their front. That's the street view. You want everybody to see it all nice and neat. And then maybe in the back where you're a little bit more laid back, you might have more wildflowers and it could be a little bit, more natural and rangy. It just depends on your taste, but of how you want to put that together. Container gardening, patios, decks, entrances, little courtyards. If you live in an apartment or you have a small house, maybe you rent and you can't dig and plant in your yard. Landlord says, no, you're not digging, you're not planting. You can use containers to still grow your plants without having to dig in the actual soil. So I think we've talked about this a little bit right at the first, using a good potting mix, using a good container. You want to have holes in the bottom of your container for drainage. You can use a lot of different types of containers as long as you do put the holes in the bottom. You could put, let's see, irrigation is going to be critical with your container gardens. They tend to dry out very quickly, especially in the summertime. But again, make sure if you put a pan underneath them, water them real good until the water comes out the bottom, fills that pan up. And again, like we said with the seeds, leave it on there for about 30 minutes and then dump off the excess water. Unless it's really hot. I mean, in July and August, I will leave that extra water there because it's going to evaporate very quickly. And that will, help that plant out for a little bit longer. It's not going to make it soggy and get diseased and die. So, but you have a lot of flexibility with your containers, season by season. Even, we've got Christmas coming up. You can put maybe a small evergreen plant in a container and then put some fake little red and white flowers or whatever color you like, or if you're going into fall, or oranges and yellows and things like that. So a lot of, just get creative. There's no rule or rhyme, it's what you like and what looks good in the garden. And so here we have just some different methods using recycled, that's recycled guttering that they put on the side of the house to grow some lettuce. That's kind of almost, it's not a hydroponic system, it's got soil in there, but it's going to catch the rainwater coming off the house, different things like that. And your containers, lots of colors. You want something that weeps, you want a little height. Usually you want something spiky in your container. But if you look at this, I mean, that's pepper plants in there along with the ornamentals. So mix those things together. So I'm designing a container garden. It can be as simple or as complex as you want. Just keep in mind the colors, the shapes, the heights. Spillers, those are those plants that cascade and spread over the sides. Fillers kind of fill up the space, and thrillers are the ones that add the color something dramatic that draws your eye to it and makes it kind of stand out. Annuals, perennials, woody plants can be mixed together in a container. When it becomes less interesting, then you just pull those out and you plant something different. So like I said, if you plant a little evergreen in a pot right now, after Christmas season is over, you put it out in the landscape. You don't have to leave it in that pot. Just go ahead and plant it out in your yard. So, so you just kind of recycle, refresh. You may have to mix up the soil a little bit, add a little bit new potting soil to it, and freshen it up. But so much you can do with containers. Your containers do need to be strong enough to hold the growing media, and the mature plants should be wide enough not to tip over. And that's another reason why I mentioned earlier on the pots, where you can get those little things. They're round and they got wheels on them, and it kind of makes them a little bit more stable, and it makes it easy to move around if you need to bring them in and things like that. So but container styles, it's unlimited. There's plastic, there's the clay pots, the plastic pots that look like clay pots, but they don't weigh very much, are really good. Tubs, barrels, metal containers. You just want your growing media to be well drained, have those holes so that the excess water can drain out. And generally taller containers provide longer water columns and better drainage. Media, soilless media, we talked about this, like the Pro Mix or something similar. I'm not going to recommend one brand over the other, but what I usually tell people is you get what you pay for, with your potting mix and everything. If you get the $1.50 a bag stuff, it's probably going to have a lot of clumps and weeds and chunks of wood and things like that over the expensive bales that you might get. So, but in that mix is usually a combination of peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, or sand. You don't want to have a lot of sand, especially in our clay soil. If you're putting it in your soil, sand and clay makes bricks. So, sometimes fertilizers and wetting agents are in the potting mix that you buy. If you have diapers, now I know diapers are expensive. This is not a good trick these days, but if you buy cheap diapers, or maybe you have some left over from a grandkid that grew out of them, whatever, you can take those little polymers out of the diapers and put them into your potting soil, and when you water, they expand and they help hold in the water in that pot. So you can buy water, the water polymers themselves. It's just like a little gooey white thing. But I mean, I guess everybody's seen the inside of a baby's diaper. It's just, they're squishy. It's just kind of squishy, and it absorbs the water, so you take a clean diaper and you put that in, open that up and put it down in your soil, and that can help it hold water. And then fertilize as needed. If your plants are starting to turn yellow, they're not flowering as well, they might need a little boost of Miracle-Gro or some other type of fertilizer. Here's just a good picture of your soilless mix, basically. Your garden soil and a soilless mix, and then there's your peat, your perlite, and vermiculite. Those are usually mixed together to make your potting mix. And this just shows how, if you've got the proper potting mix, how your plants are going to make a healthy root system all the way down to the bottom of that pot. You don't want them to just be centered, at the top. And a lot of that has to do with your watering practices. If you only water that pot and you don't let the water drain out the bottom, it's just watering that top portion. And so all your roots are going to grow right there. And so you want to make sure that you wet it completely until the water flows out the bottom. And then the roots will fill up that whole area. Okay, questions?
Yeah, you've mentioned before in the past classes, I've heard them mention that you have to add natural soil. Do you
Okay,
have to do that with your potted plants too?
okay, hold on just a second. We've got a question from the inside in the face-to-face class. I'm sorry. I'll get you. Okay, go ahead. Mhm. Yeah, kind of like companion plants. I mean, yeah, there are some plants that you don't want to plant together, you know, but for the most part, they're going to work together and be fine. Okay. If they should be beneficial to each other, yes. So the roots will grow and they will help each other, kind of like the trees intertwine their roots in a natural system, and one plant helps out the other. That will happen in a pot of flowers also. Okay, the secret life of trees. Yes, you can. Okay, I'm sorry. Now, what's our question?
No, I was just curious, in the past classes, they talked about where you had to have natural dirt in with your soil, your planting, your bag soil. Is that the so with the plants in a container?
You can put, she's asking about putting natural soil like out of the garden. I would make a mix. It does help with your water holding capacity to put a little bit of real soil in with your potting mix. So that, you know, that won't hurt. I mean, a lot of people do that in raised beds, especially. It just depends on the type of clay. I mean, if it's really sticky clay that's going to hold water, you probably would not want to use that. Or you want to make sure that you take it and you mix it in a wheelbarrow while it's dry. And so that the structure is very similar. So you kind of break it up and you mix it up and then put it in your container.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's see what we got in the chat here. Recommendations for cutting back the knockout roses. Right now, you're going to take off the dead blooms. You're going to go through, and anything that looks like it's got disease, you usually want to cut them back 18 to 18 to 24 inches tall and thin them out. And so when we talked about pruning, you know, you're just selectively pruning out different branches, and especially getting those spent flower heads off so that you can reduce the rose rosette for the next year. And then somebody says, container garden on city balconies can be phenomenal. Yes, I agree with that. One time I went on a horticulture trip, I believe it was down to South Carolina, and I was just amazed in the alleyways and in between the houses, you know, even though they were so close together, almost everybody had flowers growing from their window boxes and around their gates and things like that. So yeah, it can be pretty awesome. All right. Okay. Should roses be cut back now? Yes, you can still cut them back now. Like I said, just for doing a general cleanup, especially to get those spent roses off. Okay, unless you want to collect the rose hips. Okay, we got a question here in class.
One thing is be careful of cutting those rose back now. It's maybe that, I mean, like some people are okay to trim them all along the way as you go, but some people will only get like this. And then they try cutting them to 18 inches. That's not good because the only rule is only take a 1/3 of the time.
Right.
So 1/3 and then wait.
Yeah.
So you don't put them in the shop.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So it reminded me of the 1/3 rule, to not take them back too far, to cut back about 1/3 at a time. And a lot of what I was recommending now would be, you know, like thinning cuts where you're opening up that plant and not necessarily just hacking off the top of it. But again, yeah, you're right. About 1/3, about 1/3. All right, any other questions? Okay.
Except for the place that don't really like a lot of water. What if the wind starts at 20, that part of the difference.
Okay, she's asking about when you're watering indoor plants, potted indoor plants, to set it in a pot of water, let it drain, right?
You have a tray.
Yeah, you have a tray underneath it, and let the water run out, let it sit there about 30 minutes and then dump the water off. Yeah, that goes for house plants too. Yes. Yeah. But you definitely want to drain them because they're inside and they're not going to have the heat and the wind that makes them evaporate. So you definitely want to drain the water off after about a half an hour. Okay. Well, folks, I guess that's all for tonight. We do have one class left, and I will be sending out a post test, and we'll do that. You guys won't have to fill that out until after we have our last session. Otherwise, that would alter the answers and the impact. So I'll just have that here for the people that are here in person. I'll have a written post test, and I will email a post test to everyone after the last class. And then you can get them back to me as soon as possible. And just what I do with those is it's just a measure of impact, how I could show what you've learned overall as a class throughout the year. And then our next step will be in December. You all will be invited to our banquet, the Master Gardener Association banquet, and you will be our new interns, okay? And you'll receive your attendance certificates, and then you could begin working on your hours, okay? So after December, I mean, our hours run on an annual schedule. It's actually January through the end of November. I like to have the hours in by about November 22nd, so that I can prepare for that meeting in December. There's very little time there for me to calculate hours and make certificates and order pins and things like that. So if you can get your hours in by November 22nd, that's good. Otherwise, you have to November 30th. Now, this class has until 2022 to get their hours in, okay? So just.
You know when the date is, a lot of stuff's going on.
It's always the second Thursday in December. I don't have my calendar. I think it's December 11th this year, the 11th or the 12th. Yeah, we will send out an email with the information on the banquet. We always have a potluck, and we recognize our new interns. I recognize the interns from last year that have completed their 40 hours and will become certified master gardeners. And then we have different awards, like, you know, when you get 100 hours, 200 hours, things like that, you get a special pin, and just kind of a celebration and reward you all for the volunteer hours that you've done throughout the year. So. Okay, I got 2 more questions here. Yes, the meeting. Oh, okay. Yeah, we do have a meeting this Thursday also. I'm sorry, I forgot. It seemed to come off quick. We do have a Master Gardener Association meeting that I sent an email out that is here at the extension office in the cafeteria, in the main meeting room. I still call it the cafeteria, even after 20 years. It was old school. So yes, we will be meeting here on Thursday. Yes. Yeah.
Or something like that that tells us what we do to make our hours. I know it's supposed to be 40 hours.
Yes,
How?
we will actually, how you get your 40 hours. We have 13 different ongoing projects, and I will get you all on the email list, the email distribution list.
Do they have a hotline?
We do have a hotline, and I'm trying to work on that. So yes, if you feel like you would like to work into the office, that would be awesome. because I can either have people answer phones, or, if I need copies made, or, general office duties, that would be great. Yes, I don't have a program assistant anymore, and so it would it would be wonderful to have some help. So
And with the projects, there are some 1 or 2 day projects as opposed to ongoing projects,
Yeah.
such as like the plant sale.
Yeah.
You can get the plants ready, and that counts. You do that on your own time, but that counts. And if you have 1 day that we're doing the plant sale. We have a plant sale in the spring and fall, and Plant the Campus Red is a 1-day thing.
okay, and if y'all come to the meeting Thursday, you may hear a few project updates. We'll make sure that you get the newsletter, because our project list is in the newsletter. The association has their own website, and we have a Facebook site for members of Montgomery County Master Gardeners. I put a lot of announcements up there. And we also have our Montgomery County Extension Facebook page that I put announcements on. So we have ongoing projects, and then we have things that, I have people call and say, hey, I need help with, and then I find a master gardener to go help them. So yeah, there's plenty of things to do. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and close down the meeting on this end, and we will see you all next week.